It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers, and thank you all for being here. There are so many ways for you to spend your time, and we're always grateful that you choose to spend some of it with us every 2 weeks. Before I introduce our guest for this episode, I also want to express my gratitude to those of you who have taken the time to give us a 5-star rating and a fabulous review at the various streaming platforms where you find this podcast. It truly is appreciated because it helps us spread the word to others out there who are looking for a new binge-worthy podcast series. So thank you. And I also want to welcome those of you who have recently joined the Quiller Nation. There is so much happening here. And don't forget, you can keep track of all things Quiller in nature by visiting our Facebook page, where you'll find posts about current and coming episodes, interesting links to associated topics, fun memes for sharing, flashback episodes, silly pictures of me, and so much more. So be sure to find us and follow us on Facebook so you don't get left out of all of the fun. And just one more thing before I welcome our guest. I can't reveal too many details yet, but I am bursting with excitement, so I must share a few little tidbits with all of you. Everything is still in the works, so I will only give you what I can. However, I will tell you that later this month, Annie and I will be going to tour a potential venue for hosting what will become the very first ever gathering of the Quiller Nation, to be held next spring. The plan is to secure a major venue in a major centrally located American city to host us all for a weekend of presentations and, of course, performances, which will include yours truly performing Hank Whittemore's one-man play, Shakespeare's Treason. So there are many, many details to work out, but the work has begun. And as I said, Annie and I are headed to a magnificent location later this month to assess its capabilities and various venues. So more to come as it happens, fellow Quillers. But this is exciting. The inaugural meeting of the Quiller Nation to involve Shakespeare's Treason and a variety of other presentations, many of which will be centered around Shakespeare's knowledge of the law and legal terms, many of which you find in the sonnets, for instance. So watch for that. More exciting info to come, I promise. Now, let's go ask some questions. So now, fellow Quillers, I want to introduce you to my guest for this episode. He is a very humble guy when it comes to his credentials and the work that he has done. His name is Tarica. And when I asked him to give me a paragraph of introduction, he sent me this wonderful paragraph that I just love. And he says here, his biographical details are not as important as the work that he has done. And this is particularly true with respect to the notion that so many out there like to burnish their egalitarian credentials, that's a direct quote, by suggesting they are very willing to imagine that a man from humble means did something extraordinary centuries ago. And Alan says that he would suggest a willingness to consider that an unknown contemporary did something no one else was able to do for centuries should actually be a far more illustrative, important, and relevant test of that regard. And he says here that it goes without saying that considering and or embracing a new big truth, which I like to think that's what we're trying to do here on the program, is just as critical as battling a big lie, also something we are trying to do here on the program. And to not do so is essentially accepting those lies. And if you would like to know more, and we'll give you this website again, and it will also be on our social media feeds once this episode is posted, you can visit Alan's work at www.eternitypromised.com. That's eternitypromised.com. Thank you, Alan, Tarica, for joining us today on Don't Quill the Messenger.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I just love that introduction. It's so unpretentious and real and true. And I just think that it's incredible, especially it has been a theme here of the program that we believe that you don't need all these letters after your names. You don't need to be some college professor or tenured to really embrace this mystery and to dig into it and to take your own journey into finding the truth. And I'm so glad that you point that out because it is a regular mantra here at Don't Quill the Messenger.
Yeah, I've heard. I'm vaguely familiar with the broadcast, and that was actually written for another audience, and I didn't expect to use it in its entirety, but that's fine that you did. I do feel like I come at this with a relatively unique perspective. I had no training in the humanities. I just want to say that up front. So, my background and interest has always been, I was an engineering student, but my model for things has always been the sciences. I always, expect that, if you want to do serious inquiry, you have to develop a framework for things, and that the interplay of a model, that theoretical with the practical application of it and the experimental side is really how you progress with ideas.
Well, so many of us who are
that's
involved.
my paradigm for thinking, in other words. That's how I approach things.
Sure. And so many of us who are involved in, the quest to solve this mystery are not men of letters. And it's unfortunate that on both sides of the coin, whether it's Stratfordians or the elite Oxfordians, love to sort of flash those letters around. But pedigree in length of time and areas of study, in my mind, is equal in degree of erudition. And it's certainly in the minds of the Quiller Nation, we believe that if you've spent years studying this topic, there is no degree in Shakespeare authorship studies. It's too bad. There should be. But I believe that many of my guests have that degree because they have spent those thousands of hours working on this topic that you would have had to spend if you were in some graduate program at some university.
No, agreed. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who have all manner of expertise that they've acquired, in all manner of ways. And that's been my life experience. I've always been amazed at the self-taught individuals that I've met through the years. They've had incredible knowledge in all sorts of things.
Well, I'd like to dive into some of the work that you have done, and I want to tell you right up front, it's been one of my big questions that I've had throughout this journey that I've been on with this mystery is whether or not the Earl of Oxford was involved in creating this ruse of this Stratford man, this, straw man pinup guy. And I've been on the fence about that for quite some time. And after reviewing your research recently, I am leaning more and more toward your school of thought that Oxford himself was involved in this, that he and Ben Jonson probably worked together to make this happen. I don't know how much the Stratford man was even really aware of what was going on or how much impact that was going to have on his name later on in life. But I am starting to lean towards your school of thought. And I'd like you to share with the listeners some of the work that you've done that's led you to that belief.
Okay, well, I do want to say I think the Stratford man had some complicity and knowledge, but that's a minor detail. I don't know. So the way I came about this is I was really wondering about this topic as a mystery. And I was really wondering, more importantly than anything, why it was so intractable? Why couldn't anybody make any progress? And so I just kind of got involved just out of curiosity and asked questions and attended the lectures and got involved with, even local Oxfordians and became an Oxfordian but nobody was satisfying my need to sort of answer the questions that I had. And one of the primary questions I had was why Oxford didn't have this paper trail. Why didn't he have the link to manuscripts and that led to Shakespeare? Where did all that paper go in his sphere? So, I mean, I in that light, I came upon, I shared with you, there's a bit of manuscript from a collection in Norway, the Shoyen collection, I believe it's called. And it's one of the Henry plays, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And, I asked the leading Oxfordian in terms of handwriting. I don't know if I should name him or not. You're familiar with him. He was, it's up to you. I mean, about this, and he was unaware. So that ticked me off that there was information out there that wasn't being looked at. But he did explain to me the critical thing about why Oxford wasn't investigated in that light, or one of the reasons was that there were these two forms of handwriting that we have today, or at least people of my generation, I imagine yours did. We write both in cursive and print, and they had these two similar forms of handwriting, italic, which is our form of print, and the secretary, which is essentially our cursive. And we had no examples of Oxford's secretary. So this manuscript was in Oxford's secretary. I might be getting the details slightly wrong, and it's been quite a few years, been decades really. But I really wanted to trace Oxford's, I almost instinctively knew that Oxford had a secretary hand. And then I even found experts to attest that he almost certainly must have had a secretary hand. And I shared that with a gentleman named Ron Hess, who's kind of a mentor and helped me in many regards in this endeavor, provided me all kinds of letters of Oxford that he had acquired, handwritten letters. And so, yeah, this was my initial entry. But the key discovery, I'm making quotes here, that I believe that you're referring to is that I uncovered that Oxford, I believe, and this is a supposition, it's a hypothesis, that Oxford was involved in creating the coat of arms applications for Shakespeare's father, John Shakespeare. And in that light, he interestingly used the Arden connection, which is his wife, John Shakespeare's wife's connection, to establish his right to a coat of arms, which inevitably became quite controversial. And at any rate, but that he was integrally involved in creating this persona. And I don't know necessarily why he felt the need to do this, but I felt that the documentary evidence was there. And then, in addition, I found all manner of linkages of Oxford potentially to Shakespeare. There was work by Keenan Lubbock that linked the famous victories, the annotations of the Hall manuscript to famous victories, and they suppose that Mr. Shakespeare, the Stratford man, had done it. But I was able to trace that same handwriting to a manuscript in the Folger of a play called Julian July and Julian depends, and it's virtually identical hand, and that play seems to really indicate to me that it could have been from a young Edward de Vere. It really has all the hallmarks of it. He makes the mistake of changing venues midstream, and he was probably a preteen when he wrote that, and he was probably a teen when he was making the Hall annotations. So, I mean, it's been a long time since I did that investigative work, but I convinced myself that there was a real credulous reason for believing that Oxford had a linkage to Shakespeare and that he created the Stratford man. And then that invariably begged the question of why the heck would anyone do all of this? What is going on here? And so that led to the next level of inquiry. I don't know if you want to discuss that.
Yeah, well, but before we jump into the reasons why, and I do want to talk about the reasons why, because I think we both agree about the inherent underlying reasons why. I just want to clarify a few things for the listeners who might have been a little overwhelmed by some of the stuff you just shared there. And
I know.
I think I've never heard anyone else bring forward in this way that you have this sort of lost handwriting of Edward de Vere. And we have so much of his writing in the italic form, especially
letters.
The huge collection of letters that he wrote to either his brother-in-law, Robert Cecil, or his father-in-law, William Cecil. And they're all exclusively in italic form, except for certain words and certain letters in certain places where we see a little hint of a secretary hand, that, more of that flourishy handwriting style as opposed to the more print style. But I also think it's important that the listeners know that everyone who was taught to read and write at that time would have been taught a secretary hand. And it would be very unique for someone in the position of the Earl of Oxford, whether he was Shakespeare or not, to have only one form of handwriting. It would be very rare and strange if that were the case. So I love sort of the path of inquiry you've gone down. And then when you point out, and you sent me some images of these documents that are at the Folger. And when you point out that the Folger has been gathering these documents and holding on to them, one of the things I think is very ironic about the Folger is they seem to love Edward de Vere and Edward de Vere memorabilia, even though they profess that he has nothing to do with Shakespeare.
Well, that probably has more to do with Henry Clay Folger than them. He probably, when he built the collection, he sort of, I don't know when all of this stuff was collected or if they even knew the linkage to some of it, but clearly he had an interest. That's in Oxford's Bible is a clear indication to me that he had an interest in Edward de Vere.
Indeed. And so before we get into some of the reasons why Edward de Vere would find someone like a William Shakespeare who had a name so similar to this pseudonym that he created as William Shake-Speare, and it's possible that you point out in your research, it's possible that the character William Shakespeare, the poet character, was created long before we see it in actual print with Venus and Adonis and Rape of Lucrece. And it's possible that it was, sort of this name that was bandied about by certain writers who were all sort of working together underneath de Vere at the time. And it was a joke to them to use this name, and then it stuck. And then he had no choice but to play it out in such a way as to continue to create the ruse of that there is this writer from Stratford who has this name, William Shakespeare. And one of the things that I found so intriguing was the flourishes that you point out that exist on certain letters and documents in de Vere's hand. Can you explain some of that for the listeners?
Oh, that's another interesting thing. There's this style of insignia called a griffe de notar, is I believe the way it's pronounced. And it's a French kind of a flourish where you combine letters into into one single, scribble, if you will. I don't know what to call it. And it's sort of famously on a manuscript. Oh, I forget the name. The Baconians love this thing. It's you have to forgive me. It's been so many years since I did this, but so essentially, that was one of the keys to linking Oxford to some of these documents and things was that I believe that he had this griffe de notar and that it existed and I was looking for this manuscript and I never was able to find it, but there is another history manuscript that Clare de Chambord wrote about that featured this thing, and we've never been able to locate it. She took it. And Ron Hess and I, gentleman I previously mentioned, we weren't able to locate that, and it seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. It's never seemed to have shown up in an auction or anywhere else. I don't know what happened to it. I've inquired about it, but that's what you were referring to, I guess. And it does appear in interesting places, and I believe it is a linkage of. And I illustrated how that represented the letters WSS, I believe.
Right, correct. Yeah, and that blew me away when I looked at it, because it does, it could be very easily dismissed as just a little scribble that somebody puts underneath their name when they sign their name. I've done it. I've signed my name to cards or to letters or to whatever, and I've put a little squirrely underneath it. When I write a card to my wife and I put her name on the outside of the card, I'll do a little squirrely underneath it, a little flourish there underneath it. And so it's easy to look at those and go, oh, well, we could just dismiss that as him doing a little flourish, except that you've pointed out that there's so many of them and they're practically identical every time. And then when you look at them cleanly and sort of pull them apart, it does very clearly show a WSS, as in William Shake-Speare. And it's almost as if he's just being playful about it. Oh yeah, I'm that guy. And many of you already know I'm that guy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. All the examples of his handwriting, we should inform, are pretty much what Cecil said, the letters that Cecil received and he in turn archived. So we only have, essentially one half of the correspondence. And it's interesting to think, I think they had a very contentious relationship, and you and I pointed out some of my theories in that regard. But I think, he might have been rubbing his nose in that a little bit, in maybe a playful way, maybe a not so playful way. Who's to say at this point? But who knows? I mean, it's really hard to construct that level of detail in regard to what was going on, but.
Well, I think there's definitely a shift that occurs between them. I mean, there are many shifts that occur between those two men. I mean, you talk about, there's a play all in itself is just have William Cecil and Edward de Vere on stage together, and you could do, one of those, what's that Frost? There's a Frost play where it's really like two men just talking to each other, and it's based on a true relationship between a journalist and a politician. But you could do that with these two guys, but they go through these sort of cyclical changes in their relationship, and at one point it appears to me that they're working together, strongly working together, to try to get the Earl of Southampton to marry Elizabeth de Vere. And that they both want that to happen, and then it falls apart.
I suggest I disagree about that completely. I think Cecil was manipulating things. In all honesty, he knew Southampton wouldn't marry Elizabeth de Vere, and he used that to extract the £5,000 that he was able to penalize him.
Yes.
Some extraordinary sum at the time. But you have to place that in the context of, well, why would he have such leverage? Well, one, clearly, I believe that Southampton believed he was going to be king, and his father, his real biological father, Edward de Vere, believed that. So, A, he could afford to give up that money. He was going to come into way more. It didn't really matter. And B, obviously there was an incestuous relationship there. If you believe that Edward de Vere really was his father. I think that's my theory. That's my take on what was happening, and that really illustrates, in my view, the real rivalry these two men had, and what the kinds of things that they were willing to do to one another. And I expressed to you, I think de Vere married his daughter to hold her hostage, essentially, and never intended to sleep with her. And yet, Cecil, being the unbelievably sneaky mastermind that he was, managed to get 3 daughters, never a son, but 3 daughters that Oxford almost couldn't believe were his daughters, I guess, until later life had to had to admit that they were his daughters. And
well, definitely the first one.
Very interesting relationship.
Yeah, definitely the first one.
What's
definitely
that?
Elizabeth is very suspect, and he does. He refuses to acknowledge her or accept her in any way until she's past the age of 5, I believe. And it's incredible what that must have done to that little girl. In many regards. And I think when he does decide that he's going to acknowledge the little girl as his daughter, he's very, he repents. And I think you see that in a lot of the plays. I think there's a lot of apology in the plays to Anne Cecil and to Elizabeth, and the father-daughter relationships that you see repeatedly over and over and over again in the plays, I think bespeak that and show that as he grew older, he experienced a great amount of remorse for how he had behaved as a younger man.
Yeah, I think he probably was drawing on that. I don't suspect that those were intentional. I don't think that those were so the point of the play, but I think he certainly drew on his experience with this. I mean, he's sort of creating complex plays with complex people and giving empathy across the board to even the villains, and making everyone a unique individual that had ideas and motivations. Yeah, he drew on all kinds of life experience there. But yeah, I mean, I believe that the plays had a different purpose and motivation generally. They were allegorical, but I believe they were largely directed at either Elizabeth or the court in sort of arguing for, his cause, really. And so that's a, larger issue and argument that we could have.
Right. Well, and that speaks to now the origins of why this all happened. And you've touched on it a bit already, and it's no secret to listeners of this podcast that I have come to the belief that Edward de Vere is the father of the Earl of Southampton, and that Queen Elizabeth is the Earl of Southampton's mother, and that the entire focus for a while in this great mystery, it revolves and centers around that relationship and the succession of the crown and the throne, which would have been an obsessive topic for all involved at the time.
Absolutely. Obviously, this is a topic that everyone would have shown an interest in, right?
Absolutely.
So I believe I asked you to think about how contentious our politics are today, where we change, potentially a politician who gets to choose every 4 years. But what if you never got to choose, essentially? And all of a sudden, there was this choice. And that choice wasn't just for the lifetime, as I suggested, but it was a lineage, right? That choice goes through, you'll never, who knows when you'll get this choice again, if ever. Imagine that scenario. Imagine how contentious, and imagine I added that additional item where, the potential for one of the candidates is a carpetbagger of someone from another country, not a particularly loved country, who would assume the throne, versus a native son who was a son of Shakespeare, who was probably a relatively beloved figure among many. This man of letters, clearly he was obviously an influential and admired person in the court, at least for many. So, I mean, that's a scenario that's going to create this enormous level of upheaval. Everything effectively is going to center around this scenario. That's how I see the Elizabethan age, at least the latter half of it.
I think it's important that as we look at this mystery, that we try our best to understand the importance of that. And one of the things that I've been doing lately is just finding as many older books on Tudor history that I can find to sort of truly understand the Tudor mindset and the history of that family lineage and where it came from and what it came through. and realizing that everyone of the Elizabethan age knew that history like the back of their hands. And it plays a part in their ideology and in their methodology and the way that they behave and interact with each other and with the general public and the populace as well. And this era, era of time when, and it's still this way in some regards, of this, superior bloodline over the rest of us, common plebeians,
I mean, there's no. Yeah, I think you're largely right about this, but but the politics, in my view, of this time were dominated by this issue, and I think virtually all of the literature, to me, is likely misunderstood. I think geez, I'm having a mental break here. The Philip Sidney's work, Astrophil and Stella, I think is a satire of Elizabeth and Oxford's relationship. Stella is clearly a reference to Elizabeth, and I think Astrophil, he characterizes him as like this bitter weed who is really, meddling in affairs which he had no business meddling in. He's attempting to influence her, and I believe Sidney's take on it is it's not, she'll decide, and it's not for you to decide. But it's a brutal satire of Oxford's efforts, in my view. And I think everything should be potentially reinterpreted in the light of these events.
Now, how did you discover, I know the answer to this, but I want my listeners to know how you went about this discovery in your mind that this was the underlying topic that was permeating through all of what Shakespeare was, what Shakespeare became, the writings of the time. You mentioned Sidney's piece, and I don't disagree with that assessment of Sidney's piece, just like I don't disagree with the assessment that Malvolio is a satire of Christopher Hatton and his attempts to meddle with the Queen and thinking that he was going to be her favorite and maybe someday be king, her husband. You know what I mean? So I don't disagree with those interpretations at all. I think they're very, very important to understanding the works. And again, this relationship between these players, all in this aristocratic realm above the rest of us common people, and intent on maintaining that realm among themselves. Is a very incestuous group of people. You know what I mean? But how did you come to your understanding of that through, from how do you leap from doing handwriting comparisons and trying to find a paper trail to discovering the secret of the mystery?
Well, I think that really is the big, in terms of discovery, I think the real thing that handwriting led me to, and asking why, was when I started to look at the sonnets, and I essentially looked at them with a completely open mind, and I sort of created a new paradigm for understanding them, and that involves understanding them as read in reverse order and as Oxford's virtually 30-year appeal to Elizabeth to recognize their son. And so once I understood that was the context of what he was doing, and that was the context of why it was published, and that's the context of why the dedication reads the way it does, then I started to read other literature within that light and understanding those politics, and it all made much more sense to me, the pamphlet wars, and it was beyond my ability to study it all. I don't have that kind of time and energy and resources to do it. But from the little bit, just the bits and pieces that I was able to see, it seemed rather apparent to me that that's what's actually going on there. But yeah, it's really the sonnets are the key for me. They've been completely misunderstood. I know your last guest, and you discussed them, and I completely, I obviously have a very different viewpoint about what they are and why they are so important, why they were published before the plays, and their context within, this whole situation. And so, that's your answer there.
Well, and you have a very unique perspective, unique in the sense that it's not one that we've talked about a lot here on the program, but it has come up a few times. And it's ironic because the very first person who ever introduced me to this mystery suggested that I do exactly what you suggest everyone do, which is to read the sonnets in reverse order. And you have the belief, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you have the belief that the reason why the dedication is written to WH instead of HW, Henry Roseley, is because that's a clue to the reverse order, that everything is backwards here. Is that about right?
Right. Yeah. And I came about that by just, but when I started to develop my understanding of the sonnets, I obviously had a timeline in mind of where the beginning, where the ends were. And I sort of made that leap of like, well, why are the beginning sonnets at the end and the end of the beginning? And is the WH a clue to that? It's, but yeah, that it was quite an epiphany. It was a memorable day when I had that. And, that was really what led me to sort of make it all work. It was a pretty momentous leap of there, and I struggled to realize how it actually worked, but I was successful enough that it seemed that it did work. And so the places where I felt like it really didn't, I knew I must be making, there was some kind of error, misjudgment or bias that I might be bringing. But yeah, eventually I was pretty confident I made it work, but that's not to say it doesn't need additional. I've been waiting years for someone else, excuse me, to provide, a debate and discussion about my interpretation, my exegesis. And it never seems to happen. So, and I've been pretty radical and pretty insistent about that. And I think that's no mystery to virtually anyone who's familiar with me.
No, I think you're right. And one of the things that I appreciate about you that maybe others don't appreciate about you is you're pretty upfront and forward. You don't pull punches and you say it like you see it. And that ruffles some feathers and it pisses off a few people here and there. But, I've been accused of the same thing. So birds of a feather flock together. Let's put it that way. But I want to circle back to your idea that Oxford had to create this straw man, this, false front in order to sort of fix the name association of William Shakespeare, and what you believe caused him to need to do that.
Well, I feel like after those, and I don't know I forget the real name for what you call those, they're not epics, the Venus and Mars and Greece, but those two long form poems, I think, that created a stir and a lot of trouble. And whether it was the Queen or someone told him, made it clear that, someone needed to fix this. And maybe, I think he had a kind of a perverse sense of humor. The way I sort of imagine it is he sort of maybe volunteered, I'll fix it, I'll take care of this. And in doing so, did it in what at the time I would think would seem almost absurd. Finding this gentleman from this rural area that really was clearly not Shakespeare, and yet foisting this identity on him. And it doesn't seem absurd to us, but just imagine if I don't know if anyone's ever seen Gomer Pyle, this character that was this gas station attendant. I mean, maybe that's stuff. I kind of view that that's the way that this poor man from Stratford was viewed by people. And it was relatively obvious this man was not Shakespeare. And yet that's what they were left with. That's what the situation that everyone else had to conform to after he had done this.
And you could argue that he lampoons it. You could argue that he lampoons it himself. And this is one of the things that's leading me to follow you down this path, that Oxford was involved in it. And there's two instances in the canon particular. One is in As You Like It, where we have this country bumpkin named William, who shows up to challenge Touchstone for the hand of Audrey. And that interesting, connection to that play there. But then also the entire bookends of Taming of the Shrew, the beginning and the end with this character named Sly, Christopher Sly, who suddenly, comes to this belief that he's some great writer while all this is unfolding in front of him. Those two particular moments in the canon certainly do point to the author saying, oh my God, you guys can't actually believe this country idiot is the real Shakespeare.
Well, and I imagine but there's no evidence that anyone ever did. The Stratfordians like to claim that no one ever questioned Shakespeare. I would argue no one believed it. The evidence seems abundantly clear that no one believed it. I mean, you talk about how there were no eulogies when the man died, and I mean, it's clear to me that no one took this seriously. They knew it was, may not have known the truth, but they certainly didn't know that wasn't the truth. I'm almost, I'm very confident that that's how it really was. No one believed it. No one at the time believed it. It was an obvious joke.
So why does we've shared some exchanges about this, but I want you to explain to the listeners your theory as to why you believe the Earl of Oxford gets involved in attempting to acquire a coat of arms for this straw man of Stratford that he has chosen to be his front man.
That's a good question. I don't know that I can answer it definitively. I imagine it was a way of remunerating this man, giving him partly, to make him believable, he had to give him more status, but partly, this gentleman no doubt wished to acquire more status, as anybody would. This is something if you have a front man and he's doing you this favor, he clearly had some involvement, in my view. Excuse me. He had, he went to London potentially and went through this charade. You have to provide some level of benefit to him, not just monetary, but these are the kinds of things that you might do for him to show your appreciation for him participating in this. That's, one theory. Ron Hess used to say, well, even my stand-in has a pedigree. That was his way of looking at it. That reflected De Vere's, ego. But yeah, I just view it likely as just a way of saying, well, here, this is what I'll do for you.
I had we've mentioned satisfactory. We've mentioned a few times now in the discussion the name of Ron Hess, and I had the pleasure of knowing Ron casually through attendance at various Oxfordian events where he would be there, and we would meet and talk and share some ideas and thoughts. And many of the listeners probably don't know who he was. Unfortunately, his life was tragically ended a couple of years ago. And we don't need to get into the details of all of that, but you lost a research partner there and a friend, I know, and Oxfordians lost a great mind who was very into these types of details, and he did have that sort of sense of humor, and I think that he believed that Oxford had that sort of sense of humor, and I think he might not be far off thinking, well, even my front man needs to be a a gentleman. He can't just be a country bumpkin. I've got to help elevate him because it's just a stain on me if my front man is a commoner. And that kind of connects to Oxford when you think about his, first excuse for not wanting to marry Anne Cecil was that she was a commoner. And what does the Queen do? She elevates Burleigh, William Cecil, to Lord Burleigh to fix that problem and says, okay, now what? Now what's your excuse? So it is kind of a funny little circle there when you think about the life of Edward de Vere. If we're right about that, it would make total sense.
Perhaps. I mean, people can have that debate. I've never felt the need to answer that so explicitly. I mean, it's certainly an interesting line of questioning, but yeah, I don't know quite what motivated it, in all honesty. It's certainly an interesting topic we could discuss.
Well, you point out in your research that if you're correct and Oxford was involved in these applications for this coat of arms for the Shakespeare family, you point out that there is a ancient family connection there that they both have, and that's what is finally used to get the coat of arms granted, which then becomes very controversial, as you say, because it gets questioned as to why did this get granted? How did this happen? It almost looks as though there were those who, after it happened, wished they could have taken it away. But you point out this long-standing ancestral connection between de Vere and Shakespeare. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I don't remember the details. I mean, Ron pointed out to me that was probably how de Vere would have known about Mr. Shakespeare, that he had an ardent connection, and thus, he might have been aware of this sort of distant family out in Stratford upon Avon. But I also think the name is also critical. I think the coat of arms applications were a means of associating the name Shakespeare with the Stratford family. I think it was even important then. So that's been my working theory. Stratfordians love to talk about how spelling didn't matter and the names, his name was Shakespeare was Shakespeare, but no, I think the Earl of Oxford was instrumental in making that connection. And I think it was important to do so for whatever, I think it must have been, I suspect it was important to do so. But I don't know enough about the Ardens, in all honesty, or whatever I knew I don't remember, unfortunately. Like I said, it's been years since I engaged in much of this work.
But you do believe that if we're able to find some definitive example of Edward de Vere's secretary hand, that it would compare with the secretary hand that was used to write those applications. Is that where you're sort of standing?
Well, it would in this, but I also think that was I actually also believe he went to some level to conceal it. They're very sloppy. I think he was I almost want to think he was actively trying to conceal that he wrote them. And the way I really linked them to him was through the italic embedded. When I sort of got a candidate secretary hand in my mind, and I would see these applications as I looked through things of, written in secretary, I was invariably drawn to them. But when you try to do the exact match of what I think his candidate hand is, and then it doesn't quite work. I think he was actively concealing his writing, and that's just another work. Maybe people think I'm crazy in that regard, but no, I think he was also capable. He was such an accomplished writer in the literal sense of writing. He wrote so prolifically, and this was a sign of the age of how that someone like him could vary their writing, and they took pride in it. And it's something I'm almost certain that he was doing, and it was cognizant that he didn't want to be linked to these things.
Well, it seems to me that a man of that,
investigating.
It seems to me like a man of that sort of talent, and as you say, such a prolific writer. And, there are many out there who believe that William Shakespeare wasn't his only pseudonym. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Robert Prechter.
Sure.
But it sounds like you two sort of could overlap on some certain things. And it would seem to me that, of course, he would have the ability to disguise his handwriting and probably wrote in a variety of different forms and had different styles of S's or E's or F's that he threw in to try to hide or conceal which name he was writing under on this day, as opposed to which name he was going to write under on that day.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I think it's interesting in and of itself that we don't have any definitive examples of his secretary. There's nothing that we can actually link to him. There was some level of cleanup effort, seemingly. I mean, this is where it becomes almost necessary for, the quote conspiracy at some point, because it is so suspicious that such a level of effort was made so that Oxford could not be associated with Shakespeare. It seems to me there was a clear effort in that regard by not just him but others to after the fact sort of make sure that people didn't make that connection. It was too dangerous. This was an existential threat to England, in my view, and I don't know if people are really aware of the threat that the Catholic Alliance of Nations was posing to England, and the circumstances of why Elizabeth would need to conceal a son, but they were looking for any provocation to invade England and effectively take over the throne. And I mean, this was a very delicate matter, and this was something that she probably, I'm virtually certain she agonized over her virtually her whole life of she could make her son her heir.
I'm not so sure I agree with that. I kind of feel like she was a cold-hearted bitch in a lot of ways, and so I'm not certain that I follow you along that line of thinking. But I do think that another element of this that's important is that people in power will do almost anything possible within their means to remain in power. And we see that at every level. You see that I see that in small nonprofit organizations. I see that in theater companies. I see that at every level, let alone the highest level of, the crown of England. And, Robert Cecil, let's not forget, is probably one of the greatest masterminds of manipulation in the history of history. And so there was also, I think, some play there with regards to him wanting James as king. And maybe there's a good side of him that believed that that was the best way to avoid a bloody civil war. Or maybe it was just about self-preservation because he knew James was going to continue Robert's power and that Robert was going to continue to be advisor to the crown, just like his father had been before him. It could be a combination of both, but certainly those elements play a big part of this entire scene that we're talking about.
I partly agree. I also think, that the contentious relationship between De Vere and Rosalie and him would have almost assured that they didn't continue in that same light. They didn't continue with that same power. So, I think he knew where their future. I think his sympathies were pretty clear. But they were key figures, no doubt. They played a very important role in all of this. They had a lot of influence over Elizabeth, and but I disagree. I think there's a portrait of Elizabeth virtually debating this in old age that it's sort of allegorical. That sort of and I forget the name of the painting, but I think I'm relatively of the opinion that. This was something that she likely wanted to do, and it was beyond her means. She just couldn't take that risk. But we can have that debate. I think that's an important debate to have.
Well, and if you're right that she was torn about this, and that what she really wanted was to be able to acknowledge her son to be the successor to the throne, it could be argued that every time she started down that path to try to set things in motion in that way, he did something stupid or foolish to ruin it, to make it more difficult for her to do so. I mean, he was definitely his father's son. There's no doubt about that. That headstrong, impetuous nature got him into so much trouble and almost got him killed. And I think in the long run, it did get him killed, because I think he was murdered. I think he died. Yeah, he died on the battlefield. That's the easiest place to murder somebody, is on a battlefield.
Well, I mean, you tend to send your enemies there to begin with, right? So, yeah, but you have the power to do so. Yeah, I mean,
it's biblical, for goodness sake.
Topics. What's that?
It's biblical, for goodness sake. Yeah. Didn't King David send his lover's husband off to war so he would die, so he could have her? I mean, isn't that the David and Bathsheba story? I mean, come on, it's ancient.
Right. No argument there. I mean, I lost my train of thought about where I wanted to. There was a point that I wanted to contest there, and I'm sorry.
That's okay. Sorry. I get criticized by listeners that I interrupt my guests too much. So if I've done that, I apologize.
No, that's fine. I think it is an incredibly it's a big motif in Elizabeth's life. I think the act of treason, changing that, you're probably familiar with that little detail, where they changed the act of treason so that to talk about an issue of her body. I think she, like, I was agreeing with you that she went down this road. I mean, she was making sort of these efforts to sort of provide this possibility, and it for whatever reason it didn't happen clearly. But I think Oxford was convinced that it would. I mean, maybe that was wishful thinking, I presume he knew better than me, and he had a good reason to think that he had good chance. I mean, he didn't engage in this lobbying effort just out of pure desperation. I think he believed it. He expected it. That's my take.
I think I agree with you. I think he did believe it. I think he did expect it, and I think at some point, he realizes that the Cecils are not going to allow it to happen. And I'm starting to lean towards the belief that he was the puppet master working out these machinations behind what became the Essex Rebellion, and it failed miserably. He got outsmarted and outplayed, and I think he suffered tremendous guilt after that. I think he felt that he bore the blood of Essex on his hands, and I think at that point he does everything he can possibly do in his power to save the Earl of Southampton, to save his son from the same fate, and he makes every deal he has to make to save that boy. And I think that's what a parent does. I think that's how a father behaves. You do whatever you possibly can to save your child from death.
Yeah, no argument there. Clearly that was the case. But I also think there was, I expressed this, there was some recognition that after the Essex Rebellion, it was clearly over. And I think that's what the Phoenix and the Turtle was all about. I mean, that was really the eulogy. That's essentially, at that point, Elizabeth metaphorically dies. She's no longer going to live on. And I think, that's really the key to understanding it. Shakespeare doesn't write a eulogy to Elizabeth dying, right? Everyone believes that. But in reality, he did it this way. Like, she effectively had died. In his mind, she was dead. She wasn't going to live on. That was death to De Vere.
No, I agree with that. And we've had several episodes most recently over the last year about the Phoenix and the Turtle, because I believe that it's a great piece of this puzzle, and perhaps even one of the essential keys to unlocking the door to the truth here. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that and bring it up, because I think it's understudied and under-realized in its importance. And I think one of the reasons why that is so is because Stratfordians have never been able to explain it or unlock its contents, so they just dismiss it and push it aside. And I think that there's room there for us. Well, of course it is, but I think there's room there for us to keep forcing them to address things like the Phoenix and the Turtle, like the Passionate Pilgrim and the sonnets particularly, keep forcing those down their throat and make them try to explain what they mean and where they're coming from.
I mean, I've sort of given up on them. I've really, in all essence, decided that it's easier to convert the rest of the world than to convert them. So that's really, as crazy as that sounds, that's actually been my approach. It's just exposing it to as many people outside of that might be receptive, and I think that's had actually, in all honesty, it has an effect. I think that's why Stratfordians are feeling the pressure. But we can. I
absolutely agree with you 100%. That's the whole purpose of this podcast series, is to reach out to people who are interested in this mystery and to convert Oxfordians one at a time. And it's sort of a grassroots effort. The halls of academia are a waste of our time. It's the common people who are just interested in this topic, or who are, in my sense, impassioned about trying to right this wrong and fix this injustice. And that's the artist in me, of course, speaking there. But I think you're right. I think that the wave is growing and building, and our listenership around the world is a testament to that, and proof that we continue to gain members of this Quiller Nation left and right with every new episode. And it's one of the reasons why I like to share guests like you with my listeners, so that they can go and visit your website and see your particular take on it and the research that you have done. I'll remind everybody, it is www.eternitypromised.com. That's eternitypromised.com. If you'd like to see what Alan has been working on throughout his journey into this mystery. And one of the things before we go, Alan, that I would like to talk about, though, is you sent me a copy of a paper that you wrote that was basically about the ethics of belief and the ethics of this, false front, this fake man from Stratford, and how it doesn't hold up to proper scrutiny, and the fact that you had been shut down so many times by members of, the literature elite on both sides of the coin, for that matter. And it was a very interesting read, and it reminded me of some of the work that others have been doing with regards to really challenging the mind when it comes to these belief biases. Share some of that, if you would, please.
Well, I feel like, if we're going to engage, we're going to make the pretense that we're engaged in a pursuit of truth, then pretty much, obviously, everyone has an inherent responsibility to open themselves up to all manner of ideas, perspectives, and evidence. And I'm like I said, I'm relatively radical in the sense that if you don't do that, well, I feel like there's a price to be paid. And my price is exposing people that they are not doing that they're engaging in a charade. And so I had that opportunity. I was invited by another person who was creating this collection of people who were challenging orthodoxy, and I had the good fortune to be included in that. And I wrote this piece specifically with that in mind, to express that we all lose. It's not just, this is about more than me. There's a larger principle at stake. We're all robbed of ideas and potentially revelations and truth if the gatekeepers can just purely act as gatekeepers and not engage in this honest, open debate, not engage in honest, open inquiry. And that is really my dedication. That's really my passion and my point. Shakespeare is interesting, no doubt, and important, no doubt. But it's this larger principle to me that's absolutely just, that's my real motivation, to really give people the light of seeing how the real world works and how people will shut down debate on a level that I just find unacceptable.
I absolutely agree.
Answers.
No, I absolutely agree. And I hope that paper will be available on your website. I think you had to send it to me as a PDF, but.
I think I included it. Unfortunately, I lost my first site. Google shut down my first account, and I haven't been as good as I should have because I have had to be so busy, like just promulgating my own work by the most crudest of means. But in essence, I haven't also done as much as I should to have recreated some of the information that I have on my site. But maybe I'll be incentivized to do that as I see more people engaging with it.
Yeah, and another great point that you made in your work is this, idea among those who call us all crazies and tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists, and this idea that the Shakespeare brand, and that's what I like to call it because I think that's what he did. I think Oxford created this brand at a time when that was revolutionary. When you think about it, we're surrounded by brands all the time, right? And what we would call pseudonyms or fictitious business names, as it were. But he created this brand, and like you say, everybody knew it wasn't this guy from Stratford. So that's why nobody acknowledges him, and that's why nobody puts any questions out there. There's this commonly known secret that, Anheuser-Busch is behind Budweiser type of thing. You know what I mean? To put it into those types of terms. Yeah. But you talk about the idea that Shakespeare not being a conspiracy. They often say, well, how many people would have to have been involved in this big conspiracy to keep this a secret? And I disagree with that. And I think you're right when you say that, that's a belief bias in itself. And here we are living in a world where we are surrounded by that type of secrecy, especially government-controlled secrecy. And that's not a conspiracy theory. There are classified documents that are not available to us common people. There is an entire layer of secrecy at so many levels above us in our current government structures. Why is it so hard to believe that could have existed in a totalitarian state 400 years ago?
Well, thank you. And the limited research I've done, there really is no sense that would have happened. It's shocking to me that people think that we had such openness and transparency at the time. It's almost comical to think that they didn't have secrets, and to imagine what they would have done to keep those secrets. No, thank you for that. Absolutely. It's just, and I was listening to Phoebe Nerve talking about how kids today are more receptive to this notion that there is another world, that the world is not clearly as open and transparent as we'd like. We fight for it, but we often lose. I mean, clearly there is this whole other world of secrecy that we're not allowed to see.
Well, and I would even take it a step further in the connection to, people go, oh, Elizabeth couldn't have secretly had a baby. And now, well, that's just crazy to believe that Oxford was the father of the Earl of Southampton and Elizabeth was the secret mother. Except let's take a look at the current royal family today. And you name me how many people actually believe that Prince Harry is not the son of Charles, but is actually the son of the Royal Air Force pilot that his mother had an illicit affair with, and how that secret has been quote unquote kept but yet outwardly known. I mean, right here in modern times, we have a very specific example of this same type of thing. And it's been going on within the royal families of England for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Well, and I would offer, in autocracy, even if you know the truth, you know better than to talk about the truth. And even those few people who are aware of everyone understands the rules. Everyone understands what they're allowed to say and do, and other people understand what they're allowed to inquire about. Like if you offer an absurd explanation, for something, as governments often do, it's a signal not to inquire. And I think the Stratford man functioned in that regard. Don't ask questions. It's not for you to know, and you'll abide by what we tell you, and people will invariably do so.
The exact opposite of the theme of this show. So there you have it. Well, thank you so much, Alan. I appreciate it. I appreciate you giving us your time and sharing your work and your roads of journey into this mystery. Again, ladies and gentlemen, you can find Alan's stuff at his website, eternitypromised.com. We will put that link up in our social media feeds so that'll make it easy for you to find. Those of you who are listening to us through our own website or whatever download location. Again, Alan's been great. This was our first actual official meeting, though we have shared communication over many years, and I'm glad to have had you as a guest and to speak to you to some degree personally.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, please keep up the good work, and please continue to share with us any avenue or road you decide to pursue down the line with regards to solving this great literary mystery.
Will do. I'll be interested to hear from anyone who wants to debate any of these topics. So.
Oh, and that's another thing. You can contact Alan directly through his website. There is an email address or a contact button there. So if you'd like to engage with him, you can do that as well through his website, eternitypromised.com. Before we wrap things up, Quiller Nation, I'd like to remind you that you can find Alan's work at his website, eternitypromised.com. That's all strung together. Also, don't forget to find and follow Don't Quill the Messenger on Instagram and Facebook. There's a lot going on there that you don't want to miss. And please feel free to share some stuff there as well. Especially, we would love to see some fun, creative Don't Quill the Messenger memes, or Oxfordian memes, or Shakespeare Authorship Mystery memes. So start sending some of those, post them on our Instagram, post them on our Facebook page. We'd love to see them. We're going to be having a Quiller Nation meme contest in the coming months. So start brushing up your meme skills and getting some practice by sending us some posts. And of course, be sure to visit our Patreon page where you can find information about becoming a patron of the show, accessing special bonus features, and qualifying, of course, for our Quiller of the Month drawing and free giveaway. And that said, it's time for our very own producer Jake to declare this month's lucky winner. Jake, give it a spin.
That I don't know what that was. And quite frankly, I don't like it, Stephen. But yes, I am here to once again spin the wheel to see who is going to be the Quiller of the Month for the month of April. If you don't know what this is, then head on over to patreon.com/don'tquillthemessenger and find out. Without further ado, the Quiller of the Month for the month of April is Sara Gerard. Sara Gerard, congratulations, and keep an eye out for your email where we will send you a message to find out how you can claim your winnings. Congratulations and thanks to each and every one of you who continue to support this program via your patronage. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake. And congratulations to this month's winner.
Nope, don't like it.
That's my radio announcer voice, by the way.
You should be embarrassed.
You too can be a winner by joining those who have already subscribed as a regular patron. Just visit our website and click on the red Patreon button right there on the homepage to learn all of the details. And let me personally thank all of you who do contribute to this, the fastest growing authorship mystery community on the planet. We truly appreciate all of you. You are the Quiller Nation. Don't forget, you can write to me directly by sending an email to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. I love to hear from all of you on any pertinent topic, and I always send a response. Eventually, but always. And so many of you now know that from personal experience. So send me your questions. Let's try to answer them together. In the meantime, Quiller Nation, help spread the word. Share this podcast with others. Share our social media posts. Help us to convert the world one authorship skeptic at a time. And whatever you do, wherever you go, wherever you are, with whomever you are, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.